Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. And thank you all so much for coming to our workshop today on designing for the extremes, which is our joint workshop here between the Extreme Access and Extreme Environments groups in the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium. I'm Angela Stickle. For those of you who don't know me, I am the lead for the Extreme Access group, and I'm joined here by Jamie Porter, who is the lead for Extreme Environments. Just to kick it off, we're going to go through a kind of a little brief introduction before we dig into the meat here. So, Andrea, could you go to the next slide, please? All right, so just to start off, figure we'd try to get you all on the same page as us on kind of why we're here today. And, you know, kind of one of the big goals that we have for this workshop, and one of the things we talked about when we started planning it was that, you know, there are a lot of things that go into a good design for any mission or any technology. And really the moon and the lunar surface have some really specific challenges that are different from a lot of other places that maybe people are used to operating in or designing for. And so we wanted to talk about that and talk about specific ways and sort of best practices for design or challenges that the moon might give us. Right now, a lot of our focus are being sort of the community's focus is on, you know, testing of single technologies or, you know, prepping small flight demos. And we all know that we want to get to these bigger systems and bigger longer term operating systems later on. And so we want to talk a little bit about, you know, how might we scale from what we're working on now. You know, we're building up these technologies. A lot of them are new or different from what we've had in the past. And how might we scale these up? And what are the things we have to think about when you're changing the scale of your design at that kind of level? And so this is something, you know, that we have a few notes here that, you know, the systems that we're thinking about for the lunar surface and going forward are orders of magnitude bigger scale than what we currently have in the missions that are currently being designed. You know, we have the Viper rover that's going next year to the moon, but we might need, you know, if we're going into the South Pole, might be way more difficult than what Viper has to deal with. And how do we take what we learn there and how do we scale it up, or how do we, you know, build 10 rovers to do things? And, you know, one of the things that we want to come out of this is sort of what are the things we have to think about to do this? And maybe the answer is that we don't know yet, but that's a really important answer so we can start working through some of these questions. And we also want to talk a little bit about, you know, how you might do this and approach it as a systems design. So we have a couple of really great panels lined up for you today to talk a little bit more about this, looking at effects and risks and things you might have to worry about when you're doing design considerations for lunar technology. And we're going to focus in here today on a couple of specific scenarios, really just to guide our thinking, and so that we're not just sort of, you know, have too big of a sandbox, but to keep people together. And so we'll get into more detail later, but, you know, with the kind of assumption that we're going into this workshop on today is to talk about, you know, we want to do production level in situ resource utilization, and that Shackleton Crater is a place that we could find the volatiles. And we're going to use a specific study, the RLSO2 study, as a guide for this, and talk about, you know, access solutions beyond what our current mission designs can do. What technology do we need to access, operate, and survive? How do we scale up? And what are really important things to consider in terms of environments or in terms of knowledge gaps going forward? Okay, so next slide, please, Andrea. So this is being put on, if you're new and don't know this, as part of the Lunar Surface Innovation Initiative, which is sponsored by the NASA Space Technology Mission Directorate. And our activities are sort of broken up into 6 focus groups. You can see them outlined here on the spokes of this little base. And we're going to focus, well, we're hosting from 2 of them today, but kind of focusing on the third, the ISRU. And we have these kind of focus groups broken out, but if you go to the next slide, Andrea, really they're all interconnected, right? You can't do a sustained lunar presence without kind of thinking about all of these things. And so that's kind of what we're wanting to talk about today, is how might we think of this as a system and what are the important considerations there. So next slide, please. So as I said earlier, I am the lead for the extreme access focus area. And this focus area is very broad in its scope in terms of the different sorts of technologies that we talk about. It's basically, we are concerned with all of the things that you need in order to access anywhere on the surface anytime you want it, essentially. So things like navigation, mobility, position navigation and timing, communications, autonomy, all of these things that work together to give you global lunar access. So we will be talking about some of these today, and hope that those of you here, have interest in some of these and can help get the discussion there. We do meet every second Thursday of the month, so if you don't normally come to our telecons, feel free to join us. And I'm going to pass it over to Jamie.
All right, Andrew, you can go to the next slide. So I am Jamie Porter, as Angela was talking about earlier, and I run the Extreme Environments group. And these are some of the things that we cover. We're kind of a catch-all because there's a lot of things that go into an environment, but you'll hear about a handful of these today. And I really want to make it clear that radiation, for example, we're not specifically talking about that today, but it is something that we cover. It would have been a whole workshop, 5-day workshop, if we cover all of these things. We picked a couple things that we wanted to talk about from the environment standpoint for this, but if you are interested, we actually meet on the second Tuesday of every month, and feel free to send me an email and we can get you in to those meetings. And we also have subgroup meetings that happen throughout the month in these individual areas. Andrew, next slide. So Angela did a really good job of covering kind of what we're doing today. So I'll be brief on this one so we can jump into our opening speaker. But this workshop, we really wanted to dig into what specific challenges that you have that are introduced by having from the different effects of the environment on your design, on your hardware, that is applicable to this study. And we wanted to give people a way to kind of talk through some of those scenarios, things that you need to worry about, things that you maybe aren't thinking about, how you test them. And through this, we really want to identify data and technology gaps that we currently have that are hurting us to get to where we need to get to. And how do we test those? Are those things that we're going to have to do on the moon? Are those things that we can do here? So that is our goals of this workshop, and that's what we want to get out of it. You go to the next slide. So here is our overall agenda. We're, a minute over, but we'll get there. We're doing our brief introductions, and then Alex Austin, who I'm about to introduce from JPL, is going to do a walkthrough of the study itself to kind of get everybody on the same page of what we're talking about here. We'll have a nice break for everyone, and we'll start with our EE panel, another break, our access panel, and then our breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and wrap up for our closing discussions. And the one thing I want to reiterate, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, not necessarily the chat, but the Q&A, to make sure that our speakers are going to get to hear that. At the end of the talk for each section, we're going to answer those. So we're not going to take them real time. We're going to let them finish their discussion and then ask those questions as needed. So next slide, please. All right, like I said, Alex is going to be our plenary speaker today. We have our extreme environments panel that we'll introduce when they come up. And then this is our extreme access panel that will follow them. So I will take that screen away and